2 million soldiers, 1 million landmines, 11,000 artillery pieces targeting 10 million Seoul civilians, 40 to 50 nuclear warheads with intercontinental reach. All of it, every soldier, every mine, every warhead. The consequence of 2 American officers spending 30 minutes with a National Geographic map in August 1945. Dean Rusk later wrote that he was not aware of any effort to consult the Koreans about the decision. 3,000 years of Korean civilization, divided in 30 minutes, by men who had never been there. The 38th parallel is this series' most dangerous border. Korea was a unified civilization for approximately 3,000 years before the 38th parallel divided it. The Joseon dynasty, which ruled a unified Korea from 1392 to 1897, produced one of the world's great administrative, literary, and technological traditions, including the Korean alphabet, Hangul, created in 1443 by King Sejong the Great. The Japanese colonial period from 1910 to 1945 suppressed Korean political institutions, but could not erase Korean cultural and linguistic unity. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, Korea's 30 million people expected independence as a unified state. They had one language, one history, one people. The 30-minute decision gave them 2 countries, 2 political systems, and 80 years of separation. On August 10, 1945, one day after the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, Japan signaled its intention to surrender. The American government needed to rapidly determine occupation zones in Korea before Soviet forces, which had entered the Korean Peninsula from the north on August 9, advanced too far south. Dean Rusk and Charles Bonesteel were given the task and approximately 30 minutes to complete it. They had a National Geographic map, not a military survey map, not a State Department political map, but the magazine's general reference map of the Far East. They chose the 38th parallel because it placed Seoul, the Korean capital, in the American zone. No Korean representative was present. No Korean authority was consulted. The decision was operational convenience, not Korean policy. The Soviet Union accepted the 38th parallel division without objection. The line placed a larger and more economically developed portion of Korea in the Soviet zone than in the American. The northern zone contained approximately 60% of Korea's industrial capacity and the peninsula's principal hydroelectric infrastructure. The southern zone contained the majority of Korea's agricultural land and its largest population centers. The division's specific economic geography, industry in the north, agriculture in the south, was not planned. It was the accidental consequence of the 38th parallel's geographic position. The 2 states that emerged from the division inherited an economically incoherent split that made each dependent on the other in ways that the Cold War's ideological division immediately made impossible to resolve. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel in a full-scale invasion of South Korea. The Korean War, which lasted until the armistice of July 27, 1953, killed approximately 4 million people, including approximately 2 million Korean civilians, 1 million Chinese soldiers, 37,000 Americans, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers from both Korean states and the UN coalition. The war ended not with a peace treaty, but with an armistice, a ceasefire agreement that technically left the 2 Koreas in a state of war that continues in 2026. The armistice restored the border to approximately the 38th parallel, the same line the 2 officers had drawn in 30 minutes in 1945. 4 million dead, 3 years of catastrophic warfare. The same line. The Korean War's most consequential strategic decision was also its most consequential miscalculation. General Douglas MacArthur's advance beyond the 38th parallel toward the Chinese border after the September 1950 Incheon landing reversed the initial North Korean advance. MacArthur's intelligence assessments dismissed the likelihood of Chinese intervention as late as November 1950. On November 25, approximately 300,000 Chinese People's Volunteer Army soldiers crossed the Yalu River. The Chinese intervention transformed a war that was moving toward a UN victory into a war that ended in stalemate at the original line. MacArthur was dismissed by Truman in April 1951 for publicly advocating expanding the war into China. The Korean War produced the specific military and political precedents: limited war, civilian control of the military, nuclear deterrence, that shaped Cold War strategy for 40 years. North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, is the most extreme political consequence of any border in this series. The state that emerged in the Soviet-occupied northern zone under Kim Il-sung developed into a totalitarian dynasty that has ruled the same family for 3 generations, has imprisoned its 25 million people more completely than any other state in modern history, and has built a nuclear weapons program specifically designed to deter the American military force that intervened in 1950. The Kim dynasty's nuclear calculation is documented and rational within its own framework. If Saddam Hussein had had nuclear weapons, he would not have been invaded. If Gaddafi had not given up his nuclear program, he would not have been killed. Kim's nuclear program is the specific strategic lesson of American military interventionism applied to the specific vulnerability of the 38th parallel. North Korea's nuclear program is the most consequential direct security consequence of the 38th parallel's creation. North Korea conducted its first nuclear test in 2006. By 2026, it is estimated to have between 40 and 50 nuclear warheads, with intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the continental United States. The specific ICBM capability, demonstrated in multiple tests, means that a border drawn in 30 minutes in 1945 has produced a security threat that cannot be resolved by conventional military means. Any American or South Korean military strike on North Korean nuclear facilities risks triggering a conventional response against Seoul, 10 million people in artillery range. Before any nuclear exchange, the 30-minute border produced a 40-warhead nuclear deterrence problem that has no military solution. The Korean War produced approximately 10 million separated family members, Koreans whose relatives ended up on the opposite side of the 38th parallel and who have been unable to see them since the 1953 armistice. The specific human consequence, approximately 5 million South Koreans, with immediate family members in North Korea, whom they have not seen for 70 years. South Korea has maintained a registry of separated families. The two governments have held 21 rounds of brief family reunion meetings since 1985, each reunion lasting a few days with tightly controlled conditions, involving a few hundred families from a registry of tens of thousands. The last reunion was held in 2018. There have been none since. The separated generation is dying. Most will never see their relatives again. The specific cruelty of the North Korean state's management of the separation is documented in defector testimony and satellite imagery. North Koreans who attempt to contact relatives in South Korea risk imprisonment in the political prison camp system, the Kwanliso, where an estimated 80 to 120,000 political prisoners are held in conditions documented by UN human rights investigators as comparable to the worst atrocities of the 20th century. The border does not merely separate families. It makes the attempt to maintain the separation's human connections a crime punishable by multi-generational imprisonment. The children and grandchildren of a person who contacted a South Korean relative can be imprisoned for the contact their ancestor made. The 38th parallel's human cost extends to generations born after the border was drawn. The Korean Peninsula contains some of East Asia's most extraordinary natural and cultural landscapes, a geography that the 38th parallel has divided and in North Korea's case effectively closed to the world. The Diamond Mountains Kumgangsan in Korean are the most celebrated landscape in Korean history and literature, described in Korean poetry and painting for 1,000 years as the most beautiful place in the peninsula. They are in North Korea, approximately 60 kilometers north of the DMZ. South Koreans were briefly allowed to visit from 1998 to 2008. A 10-year tourism program that brought approximately 2 million South Korean tourists to Kumgang before North Korea suspended it in 2008 after a tourist was shot. The most celebrated natural landscape in Korean culture is inaccessible to the majority of Korean people. The DMZ itself, the 4-kilometer wide no man's land separating the two Koreas, has become paradoxically one of the most biodiverse wildlife habitats in East Asia. 70 years of human absence from the DMZ has allowed flora and fauna to recover in a strip of land running the full width of the peninsula. Endangered Amur leopards and Asiatic black bears have been documented. Migratory birds use the DMZ as a stopover along the East Asian flyway. The specific biodiversity of the world's most militarized border zone is the specific accidental ecological consequence of human exclusion. The most dangerous border on Earth contains one of the most valuable wildlife corridors in East Asia. The landmines protect the wildlife from the humans who would otherwise be there. The Korean security situation in 2025 and 2026 is the most acute it has been since the 1994 nuclear crisis. North Korea has accelerated its nuclear and missile testing program, declared South Korea an enemy state rather than a partner for future reunification, and conducted military demonstrations along the DMZ with unprecedented frequency. Kim Jong-un has constitutionally codified North Korea's nuclear status, making denuclearization legally impossible without a constitutional amendment, and has publicly stated that reunification is no longer a North Korean policy objective. The specific political trajectory North Korea is moving toward a permanent two-state reality in which it is a recognized nuclear state, not a temporary division awaiting resolution. The 30-minute border is becoming legally permanent from the inside. The South Korean response to the permanent two-state trajectory is the specific diplomatic and security dilemma the 38th parallel's creation produced, and that has never been resolved. South Korea must simultaneously maintain a defense posture sufficient to deter North Korean conventional and nuclear attack, maintain an alliance with the United States that has guaranteed its security since 1953, maintain the possibility of eventual reunification as a national aspiration, even as North Korea constitutionally abandons it, and manage the specific economic and political reality of a country that has developed one of the world's most successful economies in the shadow of a nuclear threat that cannot be removed by military means. South Korea's specific achievement, building a democracy and a major economy under permanent existential threat, is one of the most remarkable political accomplishments of the post-war era. The 38th parallel's specific contribution to this series is the demonstration that a border's permanence is not determined by the care taken in its creation. The Radcliffe Line took 73 days. The Sykes-Picot Line took months of negotiation. The Berlin Conference took 3 months. The 38th parallel took 30 minutes. The care invested in its creation bore no relationship to the durability of its consequences. Borders once created generate their own constituencies for permanence, states, armies, economies, political systems, and, most consequentially, nuclear arsenals. The 38th parallel is the most durable of all the borders in this series, not because it was most carefully drawn, but because the nuclear weapons on one side of it make any military attempt to redraw it existentially dangerous. 30 minutes, one National Geographic map. 4 million dead in the Korean War. 25 million people imprisoned in the world's most totalitarian state. 40 to 50 nuclear warheads targeting the continental United States. 10 million Seoul civilians in artillery range. The most biodiverse wildlife habitat in East Asia, accidentally created by the landmines protecting it. The Diamond Mountains of Korean poetry. Inaccessible to most Koreans since 2008. The separated families dying without seeing each other again. All of it, 30 minutes. The series finale continues next. The Curzon Line, which produced WW, the Holocaust in Poland, the Soviet Union's westward expansion, the Cold War's European division, and the specific territorial framework that the 2022 Ukraine war is still being fought to resolve. The oldest border in the series. The most consequences per kilometer. The most directly active in 2026. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. Borders drawn in bad faith reaches its conclusion. The pattern is complete. The borders are still there. The consequences are still running.